Hello and welcome to Business Connect Interactive. I'm Colin Grant, Editorial Director of Business Connect Interactive, and today we'll be examining how Brexit has impacted on Scottish business, ending 47 years of membership. Since then, new rules apply to doing business with Europe. To explore how or if these changes have affected trade in Scotland, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Nadeem Sarwar, founder and CEO of Phlo, a real-time, on-demand digital pharmacy with its HQ in Glasgow. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Hannah Fennell, Secretary of the Orkney Fisheries Association. And I would like to begin with Hannah and ask, in what ways, if any, has Brexit impacted on the Orkney fishing industry?
Thanks, Colin. Well, first of all, Brexit's had several impacts on the UK fishing industry, and I think it's important to recognise that the fishing industry is very diverse, so that these impacts have manifested themselves in different ways depending on the sector. For those who fish for or process shellfish, the impact's been quite severe, especially in the live market. Additional paperwork, increased time to get the products to market have weakened both the prices and relationship with the EU customers, some of whom are now trying to source their seafood from places that can offer a more reliable supply and less of an administrative burden. For the pelagic and demersal sector, which tend to be larger boats fishing for things like cod and haddock, Brexit's put a question mark around their future access to quota, and that's the amount of fish you can catch per year. The Brexit deal means that swapping quotas with individual member states won't be allowed, and that's going to reduce the flexibility of the industry. So ultimately, Brexit has had a really big impact. The stats show an 80 to 83% reduction in exports to the EU for the first 2 months of this year, which is clearly a significant loss to businesses in the short term. But also in the long term, the reputation and connections to trade with the EU have also been damaged. It's reduced productivity, and we're seeing boats landing to other countries instead of the UK. And additionally, it's made it harder for the industry to employ EU citizens, whether that's on boats as crew or skippers, or in the processing sector.
So in terms of the Orkney Fisheries Association, are they mainly shellfish fishing, or are they more involved in the larger fish?
Yeah, Orkney's fishing industry is mostly shellfish, mostly small under 10-metre boats. So at the start of the year, with the delays at the border, they've been hit really, really hard. A lot of them had to tie up and couldn't fish for several weeks because of the delays.
And have these delays been sorted out, or are they still in existence?
The delays still exist. At the start of the year, we were looking at delays of up to 3 days, but right now there are some delays, but that's just the nature of the additional paperwork. The delays aren't going away. It adds on average about an extra day to how long it would normally take to export to the EU, but that's just something we're going to have to learn to live with.
And can the industry deal with an extra day's delay?
They can in some instances, but it's not easy. A lot of smaller businesses, instead of choosing to deal with these delays, instead now sell through third parties. So they're missing out on what would have been kind of a direct selling to the UK, to the EU, sorry. So they're using middlemen instead.
I would like to bring Nadeem Sarwar into this discussion and ask, in what ways has Brexit impacted on your business and also the wider pharmaceutical industry?
Hi, Colin. Thanks for the question. Firstly, we are predominantly a UK-based business. We don't really trade internationally because we are in the pharmacy market here in the UK. So from an exporting point of view, that's not really had an effect on our business. However, as you're probably aware, there is an international supply chain for pharmaceuticals. So pharmacy, the drugs that you and I and everybody else in the UK take for many medical conditions are manufactured in various parts of the world. Anything where you are incorporating further trade barriers into that supply chain is of course going to have an impact. So for us, it's been a double whammy. Medication supply has been all over the place for the last 12 months because of COVID. And in terms of Brexit, all that's done is it's impacted on the supply chain further. So the net effect of that is that prices of medication, so that's the prices that the NHS have to pay for medication, because we get reimbursed by the NHS here in the UK, has gone up. But probably more importantly is supply. So when you go into a pharmacy, be it our pharmacy or anybody else's pharmacy, stock of certain items is much harder to find at the moment. Again, it's very hard to pin that purely down on Brexit. There is a COVID effect to that as well.
Specifically regarding Brexit, though, what has happened to change the supply chain?
Well, clearly these medications are imported via from Europe and via from the rest of the world. In terms of Brexit, my understanding is that it's actually much harder to import into the UK at the moment because of these barriers that have been placed by Brexit. In fairness to the UK government, there was significant contingency measures put in place to ensure that stock and everything else, there was I believe there was a 6-week contingency for pharmaceutical stock to be in the UK. Still, we have seen the impact, and I think many patients are seeing the impact in the sense that when they go to a pharmacy, certain items are out of stock. Generally, the way we deal with that is we'll talk to the patient and we'll talk to the GP, and we'll see if another item can be prescribed instead, which is in stock. So yes, there has definitely been an impact due to Brexit in terms of that pharmaceutical supply chain.
And you mentioned price increases. Has Brexit contributed to that?
Yes, it has actually. So look, fundamentally, you need to remember in the UK that generally for most prescription medication, the patient isn't actually paying the cost of that medication. That's even with a prescription charge. Prescription charge, if somebody does pay that, it's just a contribution towards the overall cost of that medication. Ultimately, who bears the cost of that medication for a prescription is the NHS. So yes, we have seen costs of medication go up. Generally, we then expect the NHS to increase their cost of reimbursement to us. Sometimes that's not happening in a very timely manner, so we are actually out of pocket. We're having to prescribe medication. The NHS is paying, for example, £2, and that medication historically has cost us £1.50 to buy, but suddenly it's costing us £3 to buy, so we're actually losing money because of that.
And would the NHS normally reimburse you that gap?
Yeah, they would, but sometimes they are slow to respond. And the reimbursement, they do look at this on a monthly basis because of the things are moving very quickly at the moment. And actually, that's something that the wider UK pharmacy industry is working on with the NHS to ensure that reimbursement, if prices do change, it changes very quickly at the same time.
Okay. Did these changes come as a surprise to you?
Not really. I think it's been. This is nothing that suddenly has come out of the blue. Over the last few years, pharmaceutical supply chains have been stressed, and that's just because of globalization. Ultimately, you have more countries looking for a finite supply of drugs. So the way you deal with that is decrease manufacturing capacity globally. It's much the same way as you got vaccines for COVID at this moment in time. There's only a finite supply, and you have to kind of divvy it out on a kind of global basis. Brexit did not surprise me at all. I think most sensible people in my industry in December and November and previously had built up their own stock and supply. So we're probably carrying a lot more stock than we normally do, but that's because we were unsure even up until December what the impact of you got to remember, Colin, I think the Brexit deal was only agreed just before Christmas or just at Christmas time. Up until that point, we are at a no-deal situation, and I think a no-deal situation would have been infinitely worse than the situation we currently have today.
You mentioned that you were stockpiling. Did you react in any other way to the changes?
There wasn't really much more that we could do aside from stockpiling. You talk to your suppliers and you basically look at what you would need So we did the sensible thing. If there was 6 weeks of disruption, what would we need to cover our, effectively our customer base? You look at everybody that needs a prescription within that customer base, you kind of do a little bit of analysis and you go and buy the stock necessary. But, again, it's not my job to get involved in the politics here, but I mean, the guidance was quite limited by, Her Majesty's government, but then I think it was limited because they didn't actually know what the outcomes of negotiation were going to be via Brexit anyway, up until the very last moment. All I would say, Colin, is that I fully expect this to be, it's like any kind of change, you have an impact and it's limited and you adapt to it. And I would say that things are starting to slowly get back to normal now in April, so I don't expect this to be ongoing. There's a change has happened, the supply chain will adapt to that and business gets on with it.
Back to you, Hannah. So did these changes, which are impacting on the fishing industry, did they come as a surprise to you?
Yes and no. For the shellfish industry and the inshore fishermen, the ones that tend to sell to the live market, they had been concerned about the impacts of Brexit since the referendum, and they'd been raising these issues for some time. However, the scale of the issues combined with COVID-19, we didn't foresee that at all. The larger boats, the pelagic and demersal boats, had been a bit more hopeful about the opportunities that would come with Brexit. And I think they were quite disappointed with the final deal because it just didn't give them the access or the amount of quota that they were hoping for. One big surprise that has come through, though, is that there's been a ban from the EU of exporting live bivalve molluscs, which is things like scallops, cockles and oysters, from Class B waters. Originally, we were told that this was only going to be temporary and only apply for wild-caught bivalve molluscs, but we've learned only in February that it actually applies to all live bivalve molluscs and is going to be an indefinite ban, and that's had a real impact on the live bivalve mollusk industry.
What do you think the government should do about all this?
I think I want them to keep listening to industry. I think that's really important. I think trying to work with the industry to make better bargains with the EU, perhaps by creating like bargaining cooperatives, investing in coastal communities would help. And the Scottish government did make a commitment that any additional quota would get through Brexit would go to smaller boats to help their diversification. And I'd really like to see that.
I mean, is that something that can be done right away, or I mean, why is that not happening at the moment?
I don't know. I think so much is going on with the industry, with all industries really right now, that the government's quite overstretched.
Mm-hmm. Hannah, can you describe how all this extra red tape and the delays, etc., have impacted on a specific, say, company or family of fishermen? I mean, is that forcing them to remain at home more, or are they having to adapt to a lower standard of living? I mean, what exactly is the impact on a personal level?
Yeah, I think I was saying that one of the other impacts is just that the amount of red tape and administrative work has really affected businesses from expanding. So whereas before, when they were trying to find new markets in the EU or new customers, they'd be able to send out samples. But now they can't even do that because the cost of sending a sample is as much as the cost of selling a whole pallet of seafood.
And these are regulations which the EU have introduced?
Well, these have been the regulations for any third party trading with the EU for a number of years.
Okay, so they're not just new for us then, they've been in existence for a long time? Yeah. Okay. And has that affected the number of people who are trying to, or are thinking of entering the industry? Young
the industry,
people in particular.
Sorry?
Young people in particular.
Yeah, we have been struggling to attract young people to the fishing industry for a while, and Brexit certainly isn't helping. We're working really hard to try and show that there's a future for the fishing industry, and that's why we really want the industry to diversify and get access to new quotas and new marketing opportunities, and Brexit certainly isn't helping that.
When you look at new marketing opportunities, where would you be looking? Outside the EU?
I think now we would end up having to look outside the EU, which is a real shame because the EU was our main market for live shellfish for many years. We have tried to sell things to China before, but that's been very difficult recently. And exporting to America and Canada is equally hard, and the market for just live shellfish there is already quite established, so it's really hard to break into.
I would like to bring Nadeem into this discussion. You mentioned politics, and you said that you didn't really want to get involved in politics, but I have to ask you this question. What action, if any, would you like the government to take with regards to the supply chain of pharmaceuticals?
Okay. I think from a perspective of, this goes back to the original Brexit deal. The Brexit deal that was agreed is a thin Brexit deal. I fully expect there to be other ancillary agreements and, to add to that basic deal that was done. In terms of the specifics of the pharmacy supply chain, I think anything that just allows movement of goods to be smoother than they currently are, I think will be useful. And obviously it's, in terms of Brexit specifically, it's maintaining good relationships with, the regulators and manufacturers on both sides of the EU-UK equation. Because you've got to remember, Colin, we do manufacture a lot of pharmaceuticals here in the UK as well. So it's about getting them out of the UK towards the EU. So I would say that we had a thin Brexit deal, which actually I was supportive of, because a deal was better than no deal. And it's about now bulking that deal out and making sure that we have a good relationship. I think the bottom line is we're not going back into Europe, but the UK is not going back into Europe. And I dare say Scotland is not going back to Europe in the short term. I think even if Scotland was independent, you're looking at 10 years to rejoin the EU, and that's realism, that's not politics, that's the reality. So I think whatever the situation is with the EU and Brexit, we need to make it work now. And the way we do that is to maintain good relationships however we can.
And as part of the changes, I mean, one or two other people have spoken about the increase of paperwork and red tape. Is that part and parcel of what's been changing in the supply chain?
Yeah, pretty much from what I understand. You got to remember, we're probably one step removed from the supply chain. We're like the end user, then we deal with our own wholesalers who are kind of going through that. And my understanding, having spoke to them, is that red tape has increased. And, so like I said, going back to your previous question, that's about doing things that can enhance the deal that was agreed originally, to kind of try and remove those barriers as much as we can.
Okay, thank you, Nadeem. My last question, and I think you've kind of touched on this already, is so do you think we will be seeing any changes in the trading conditions in the short to medium term? And I think you've kind of...
I think so. I genuinely think so. I think if you look at the trade data that came out, January was very, very low, but I think people such as myself had stockpiled. And hence, you had a very slow month for trading between the EU and the UK anyway in January, because everybody was looking at that data and going, oh, it's all falling apart. I think if you look at the data now, it seems to be bouncing back. There's still definitely significant issues with getting goods. All I would say, Colin, that requires movement from both sides. There's only so much the UK can do, but if the EU has been belligerent, and not wanting to kind of work effectively with the UK, then there's not much we can do. So this is about good relationships on both sides, and that goes for both parties. I don't think it's been helpful with the EU, for example, threatening things over vaccine supplies here in the UK. And the fact of the matter, that's a nonsense, because effectively, if you're to say, let's for example, talking about vaccines, you blockade vaccines at the EU side, well, there's components in that manufacturing process that come from the UK, so you're not going to get an end product. So that whole, I think the main thing, the whole point of this going forward is just good, sensible relationships, because the fact is everybody wants to win and no one wants to lose. Yeah,
that's an interesting point you made about the threat of a blockade on the vaccines. I take it, I mean, can you confirm whether or not you think at the moment the EU and the UK negotiators are being sensible, or are they not being sensible at the moment?
I think the UK has been eminently sensible. We have a world-class vaccine programme per head. the fact of the matter is, assuming that there's supply there, we will have vaccinated the majority of the population by the end of June or July who want to be vaccinated. And actually the EU are months behind. Now, the reason the UK is behind is we actually went ahead and we were brave and we put money into the science and we put money into the manufacturing and we put money into the supply chain. So we bought vaccines before we actually even knew if they were going to be effective or not, right? Now, clearly the EU did not, and they're jumping up and down. So ultimately, I think the whole point of this now is the UK is probably at the point where we have surplus vaccines, where we can actually redistribute back to Europe and help our neighbours. But threats of blockades is very, very stupid, for the sense that we're talking about global supply chains. There's things that are manufactured here in the UK that, individual components that need to go back to the EU, vice versa. It's not just a matter of saying we're going to blockade vaccines, because if you're going to do that, then I would fully expect a response from the UK government to say, actually, well, you're not going to get certain components that you need, which doesn't help anybody. Actually, no one's safe until everybody is safe, is a saying that I keep hearing. So if you're going to look at vaccines and we're talking about the supply chain, I think it's an important thing. Then I think that the EU and the UK government just need to work together. But on this one, I think the EU is being unreasonable.
And what about other aspects of the pharmaceutical supply chain? Is the EU being unreasonable, or
I don't think so, Colin. I'd be being unfair. I just think part of it is manufacturing capacity globally. COVID has that effect. But like I said, I think the main point is that if you want smooth trade, it goes both ways. Trade works both ways, right? So if you want it to be smooth, you kind of need to work together. That's the whole point. I think to kind of to finish the specific point, the UK has left the EU, right? It's happened. There's no point jumping up and down. I know the EU might be upset about that. I was upset about that originally. I'm like a reluctant, I was a Remainer, but now I've just embraced the whole thing. Well, we've left, so therefore, if you've left, you have to kind of embrace what your reality is, and your reality is this now. I think the sooner everybody embraces this is the reality and it's not going back to the way it was, the quicker you can adapt and move forward, in effect.
Hannah, just to come back, do you think that are you confident of any sort of positive changes in the short to medium term, or is it just doom and gloom at the moment?
Unfortunately, I'm not predicting any major improvements in the short to medium term. I mean, some progress has been made and it has been slow, but I'm not expecting any major changes. The issues that we're talking about, delays to market and fishermen choosing to land elsewhere, including Northern Ireland, is going to be a major issue. So unfortunately, I don't see anything improving in the near future.
Okay, so you mentioned fishermen landing in Northern Ireland. So this is foreign fishermen choosing not to land in Scotland?
No, it can also be Scottish fishermen on the west coast of Scotland choosing to land in Northern Ireland in favour of landing to local processors in their local harbours where they would have landed traditionally.
And what's the benefit of doing that?
It cuts down on the amount of paperwork that they have to go through, so it makes it a bit cheaper and a bit easier, and they can get their products to market a lot easier.
Even though they're further away from mainland Europe by going to Northern Ireland?
Yeah.
Yeah, because Northern Ireland has got this special kind of deal that it's kind of part of Britain, but also part of the EU.
Exactly. So it's really hurting a lot of small processors on the west coast because they're just losing out on seafood that they would normally have access to.
And what do these processors do? I mean, what is it what is it that's being lost?
There's a lot of added value that they'll do to the catch. On the west coast, it's particularly like prawns or nephrops, and they just aren't being able to go to market anymore. So a lot of those businesses are really questioning what their future is going to be like.
Well, thank you very much, both of you, for a very interesting insight into the different ways that Brexit has impacted or not impacted on your businesses. Thank you very much for joining me. Thank you.